Good morning, everyone, and welcome into Rounding the Bases, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. Hashtag no stopping you. It is a Tuesday. I am refreshed and ready to go. It's amazing what happens when you get a day off from baseball after 17 straight, just totally rejuvenated. It's nothing that I haven't done many times before, but in this shortened season, it's like, okay, we just got through that, and now we got 2 weeks left, which I'm bummed about. It's like we just got started and we're done in 2 weeks. But the good news is all the other sports are going. And so if you're a football fan, it was so great to see the NFL back over the last weekend. A couple pieces of business real quick before I move on to my guest. I cannot thank enough the good folks over at Kansas City Audiovisual, kcav.com. If you have audiovisual needs, I certainly did in this studio, you can reach out to them or just let me know, and I'm happy to make that connection for you. Any office, any size. They do all the big stuff. They just happen to take care of me too on the smallest of levels. And then also, I've started this campaign recently, and I'm going to start throwing this out there, just hoping I'll get a person here and there. But I'm raising money for Big Brothers Big Sisters. So I was named one of their 2020 honorees. It's a huge honor. It's an organization that I love. I was a big brother back in my early years of television in St. Louis, feeling really old now in my later 40s, and my little brother's in his early 30s. But I watched him grow up, and it's just such an awesome organization. And so I'm raising money, and I'll be honest, I'm not good at asking people for money. So I'll just throw this out there every day. And if you text J Gold to 44321, I mean, $10, $25, whatever it is, I'm just going to keep popping that up. I'll have some programming as we get a little closer to their event this winter. And bring in some guests that can talk about this and maybe make it a little bit of fun. But I'm going to keep throwing it out there and see if people are willing to help out for an amazing cause, defending our children. Now, with all of that said, I think this is episode number 126, which is crazy, a pandemic creation, and a lot of talk on this podcast about culture and business and leadership. And occasionally I'll bring in a sports guest. There are always sports ties. Today I have in common a lot with my guest. We were both born in New Jersey, I believe. We both went to the Big Ten. We're both broadcasters, and that's about where it ends because he was drafted in both the NFL and Major League Baseball. I never had any ability, but we're both broadcasters now, and I'm really excited to bring in Danan Hughes. And I also I don't dislike the Iowa Hawkeyes. We're also Wisconsin, Iowa. Hey, Danan, do me a quick favor. For some reason, I've lost the control. Will you unmute yourself on that deal if you could find it? Some reason, I just lost the ability to do that. I don't know why, but we'll see if there should be a button down there. If not, I'll just, we'll figure it out. Let's see. Can't unmute your guest because they choose. There we go. I think. No. All right. So Danan is going to get that. There we go. I don't know why that happens like once every 100 times where it's like, I know you didn't do it, but for some reason I've lost all control. Anyway, it was a long way of me getting to say that I am okay and willing to have an Iowa Hawkeye on the show. You were Michigan, maybe not so much, but Chiefs analyst on the radio, along with the great Mitch Holtis, Danan Hughes. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right, man. I know this podcast is going to be one of your higher rated ones just because you have a Hawkeye on it. So it works both sides. So, it's all good.
I think first and foremost, anything that has Chiefs on it right now, you can't miss with, because I remember what that was like when we were winning with the Royals in terms of championships. And it's like, it really didn't matter what you did. I'll go back to my days in St. Louis when I was covering the greatest show on turf, and it was, working for local news at that point. If it was an off day, we still were going to be live at the complex because that's all anyone was talking about. And I've got to imagine that's what it's like for you right now. You can't go anywhere without somebody asking you about Chiefs, right?
Oh, not at all. I mean, this is a great, great time in Kansas City. And I have to actually also tell the people viewing and listening, you and I go back to early days of my broadcast career. After my football career, we did the high school state championship. Yep. In St. Louis from the Dome. So in studio, back and forth. And those were great times as well. Fun times also. And as many people do, I'm a baseball guy. Baseball is my first love. One of the most special times as a fan, because we don't really get a chance to be fans very often. As a fan was 2014, 2015 run here in Kansas City for the Royals, especially that wild card game. That's when I first realized, when they played the Oakland A's in the wild card game in 2014. That's when I realized I'm a Royals fan. That's when I first could embrace it. So yeah, there's a lot of great history, and right now everything is swung over to the Chiefs side, and we got a special organization and a great quarterback and a lot of great players to rally around.
It's so much fun, and and I'll say this too, Dan, and it's fun not just for the fans, which really is what it's all about. It's fun for everyone involved, and it should always be fun. But I always tell people, win or lose. Like Paul Splittorff said to me my first year here, he pulled me aside and he said, 'cause I'd come from St. Louis where they were winning a ton, and then you come here and they're last place, and look, we're all fans, and I'd get mad after these losses. And he pulled me aside. He said, "Look, there are a lot of important people that get paid a lot of money to worry about these losses, and you're not one of them." And on the surface, it was like, "Hey, don't care." That's not what it was. It was like, you got a job to do, winner. You got to bring the energy one way or another. But with that said, it's always so much more fun when you're winning. And I was thinking about something in terms of split and I remember when we worked together, and I think it's a huge testament to the work that you've put in, because I know that you've done so many of those high school games and you've done so many of those college games, including baseball too. And you don't just land in the booth of an NFL game. You just don't. I mean, maybe every rare now and then you get the former superstar, but I know you had to scratch and claw for everything you earned in the NFL. And I know that it was the same way for you in your broadcasting career too. But I'm guessing that's the way you liked it, right? I mean, you did a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that Paul Splittorff did, announcing games over in, I think, Lee Summit, and high school, basketball games, baseball games. I mean, how much have you put into this?
Well, I put a lot of work into it, and it's strange because each year people would, give me credit and they say, "Oh, great job. I really enjoyed your broadcast. Do you have aspirations of going higher?" And I'm like, I'm okay. I got 5 kids. I can maneuver around their sports and travel. And, if doing Missouri Valley football and Big Ten baseball, it was cool. It was good. It was fun. I was still around the sport, doing pregame and postgame shows for the Chiefs in studio was a lot of fun. So when the opportunity presented itself to go in the booth and actually call a game with Mitch, who, I got highlights on VCR tapes. Now I'm really dating myself. On VCR tapes at home of Mitch calling touchdowns that I scored when I was playing with the Chiefs, and now I'm in the booth with him. So it is somewhat surreal, and it's truly a blessing. But I had grinded, and I'm one of those guys that obviously in this business I'm one of those personalities that doesn't know how to say no. So somebody would call me, "Hey, you want to do this high school game? Okay, I'll do it. I don't have anything to do. You want to go here over to St. Louis and do 6 state championship games in one day? Okay, no problem." So I plotted and I pressed, and I just kept moving forward. And you start getting people recognizing the hard work that you're putting in, that you're not just mailing it in and believing that, okay, just because I played football, I'm just going to show up in the booth and barely know people's names and just talk about football. And though that's not the approach that I've ever had. I'm really attention to detail, and I try to bring some energy, whether it's baseball or football or even college basketball that I've done with Mitch. So it's truly a blessing to see all that, the fruits of the labor kind of show itself at this level. And what better way for me than to be in the booth with a guy that, is a staple in the Chiefs kingdom, in Mitch Holthus, and be able to call games for the Chiefs organization that I played for 6 years for.
I mean, it's all, I would think, dream come true type of stuff when you get beyond the fact that you already had that professional career. I mean, I think everybody, every kid grows up wanting to, play on Sundays or play in Major League Baseball, or, whatever that dream is, hitting that game-winning home run. And so you did all of that, and now you're in the booth with, we could argue the best announcer in the NFL. I know that it's going to vary based on where you're at, but I think you said it right. But the word staple. I mean, in the same way that Denny Matthews has been a staple for
Yep.
generations of Royals fans. Totally different style too, right? You got one guy that is as calm as they come, and the other guy that is as amped up and fired up. But he's the soundtrack to football season for people here in Kansas City, and so you're obviously a huge part of that as his partner right now. I one more thought though, just on all the high school stuff. Like I look back at it, and it's not that I would go back because I love the innocence of it. I love
Yeah.
the just the rawness, the pureness of it, how much those games mean to a family and to people's lives because they'll never forget them versus look, how many people are going to remember what happened in week 6 of the NFL season 10 years from now? But these kids may never forget that game. So, look, I don't know that I want to go back from a time standpoint. Like you just talked about never saying no, I have the same problems. And eventually you start to say, hey, I got to focus in on certain things.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious because for me, I covered high school sports for a lot of years, well before you and I had worked together too, in St. Louis, in small towns in Wisconsin, and there's just something unique about that surrounding. And I'm guessing you sort of felt the same thing when you'd show up on a Friday night at a high school football stadium.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I felt like, I recognized what was in front of us. Most of these kids on the field will likely not play at the college level. And most of those kids that play at the college level may not play at a big college that they're broadcasting. And if they got a chance to go to a big college, they may not make it to the pros. So this is their stage. This is their opportunity. This is, you don't want to mispronounce a kid's name or not show a highlight properly or a tackle and not give it the necessary energy that it deserves, because that might be that kid's NFL. That might be his sports center. And so I took it kind of personal to do that. And I can't tell you, being in Kansas City since 1993, how many more people have come up to me based on Metro Sports / Spectrum Sports Game of the Week commentating that I did for different high schools around town, whether on the Kansas side or Missouri side, and like, oh, you called out Game of the Week, and I had a big hit or I had a touchdown, and I really appreciate how you guys handled that. So, to me, I coached baseball, traveled baseball for 11 years. I still stay connected to the kids. That's what it's all about. This other stuff that we're doing in the NFL and to some extent in college, that's kind of our job. But, when you're able to touch kids, whether it's coaching or broadcasting or teaching or what have you, to me, that's what it's all about. And that's where I get a lot of satisfaction.
Well, and it took me a while to learn this. Not that I was ever mailing it in, but you got some nights in baseball with it being the sport that's not timed that can go on and pace of play and all that. You got some nights where you're like, and I even probably made the mistake, at 2 a.m. once saying, is anybody even watching? And suddenly your Twitter blows up and it's like, wait a minute, you know what? Someone's always watching. They really are.
That's
and
right.
So you never know who, even at the level that you and I are at now, who's laying in a hospital bed and, they're having a miserable week, a miserable month, a miserable day. And they just, this is just the one thing that they want. And so there's always one out there. And if there's one, there's more than one. And so that to me always lends that perspective, along with the fact that I always sit there and say, how many people would trade spots with me right now? And the line would be, it would fill a football stadium, which, speaking of which, how strange was Thursday to see an empty stadium in a place that's never empty. But also I wonder, like the first couple of weeks for me at Kaufman, it was just weird. But then it just became normal. I mean, I wish the fans were there, but I'm grateful that we have sports versus none at all. What was Thursday night's experience like for you?
It was still weird, but it kind of grew on me. And why I say that is because the 2 prior Saturdays to the opener, the Chiefs did a great job of inviting fans in. First Saturday it was 2,500 fans. The next Saturday it was 5,000 fans, and it kind of allowed us to kind of grasp, oh my gosh, we're looking at this 70,000 plus stadium, and there's only a few scattered people. So by the time the game came on Thursday, I visually, I was okay with it. I was really surprised and really encouraged and jazzed up that those 17,000 fans were loud. They were loud. I'm not saying they were as loud as 70,000, but they were more loud than I think people would have thought. And I give those guys credit because the weather wasn't the best. And the fans that could make it showed up. They adhered to the protocol. Everybody on the field, behind the scenes, and in the stands did exactly what was necessary for us to have football here in Kansas City. And I know, speaking for the organization, we can all appreciate that and everybody's efforts. But it was a little weird not having that 12th man, because I've always told people playing in Kansas City, when we were home, I felt like we were up 7-0 before the kickoff, just by the fans. Right after the home of the Chiefs, I felt like the other team was already down 7 points. And so it has a huge effect, especially in the game of football. Maybe a little bit different than baseball to some extent, but definitely in football with the energy and the adrenaline, you're ready to run through a brick wall. And so it's fun.
There's really nothing like the Arrowhead experience. And I'm not even saying that like it's the best in the NFL, because my early years were spent covering the Packers at Lambeau Field. I would put that up there too. But in terms of noise, I don't know at an outdoor stadium that there's anything like it. And but I would say that there are just a handful of stadiums or fan bases around the NFL that the experience overall, not just the noise, and that comes with all the tailgating and all the pomp and circumstance, is different. Lambeau's like that. Soldier Field can be like that. It's certainly like that here, right? You could list off some, and others it kind of comes and goes. But this has been you use the word staple. I mean, this has been a staple for generations. And so now this is something different. I don't want to focus on this too long. It's not why I had you on, but I do think that there's actually a deeper discussion with all the national attention that came from the so-called boos. And the reason why I bring it up is because as someone that's been in the media for 26 years, it makes me cringe when the media gets blamed for everything. It just does. Like it's such an easy cop out.
Yep.
With that said, I'm learning. I had Sam Bellinger on a few weeks ago when we were talking about this a little bit, that a lot of people equate social media with media. And if you're going to equate social media with media, well, there are real media people, if you want to call it that, on social media, but there are also, anyone can be on there. Everyone can have an opinion. And so, I sit there and I think, okay, the boos that were heard, the ones that went out onto some tweets or whatever, you could hear them. Now, maybe that person was standing in that section. It's possible that NBC, you want to talk about media, if the mics were near one or two people, I'll sometimes get messages. Hey, could you tell your crew to turn down that microphone near that one guy that keeps chewing his gum too loud, whatever. And it's like, I'm not saying fake, but like what is a true representation? And so this is the argument that I've gotten in with people, because look, Danan, this has been your home for a long time. It's been my home now for 13 years. We have problems. You and I have both put that out there on social media. We're not a perfect city. We have a lot of issues like others, but I don't think that what went out on the NBC the other night, and it did go out. I mean, I heard it sitting at Kauffman Stadium. People at home heard it, but it made it sound like the whole stadium was booing this unity. And everyone that I've talked to that was there had a different experience. So I'm wondering what your take on it was.
Well, I've been pretty vocal about it, and I totally believe. And you go back to the 2-14 season, the 4-12 seasons with the Chiefs. You can't paint trash treasure. And in this business, you have to have integrity. You do a great job. Ryan does a great job. Ryan and I go way back to college playing baseball against each other. And so honesty is the only thing I know. There were boos in the stadium. How much, I can't hear the other side of the stadium away from the booth specifically. And I don't know if the mic was just under our booth and that's where the boos were coming from. But I can tell you there were boos. And unfortunately, the entire crowd gets painted one way when it wasn't the entire crowd. But there were still boos. And I think sometimes because of whether it's social media or media in general, we want to paint this whole landscape of grouping everybody together. And oftentimes it's just highlighting the one faction, the 10%, the 20%, whatever applies, and highlighting that there were boos. We don't have to argue about if it's the whole stadium or if it's indicative of Kansas City, or does this make Kansas City paint a black mark on Kansas City? No, there were boos in the stadium based on unity shown on the field. Let's address the topic of that being booed versus arguing how many were involved in it. And sometimes we get distracted, and like you said, social media allows for that, because you're always going to have that faction of people that are anti whatever the topic is, and they like to chime in. Some people get paid to do that. There's some networks out there that get paid to do that, the opposite of whatever the other network is. And we lose focus. There's an issue in our country that required us to have some form of unity for men on the field that have taken it personally. That should be the topic that everybody discusses, not so much of, well, how many Chiefs fans were booing versus how many weren't. And I was there. I've seen people on my timeline, well, I had a cousin and a next door neighbor that was there, and they did. That's neither here nor there. Great. I mean, I get that you have a perspective, but let's not deviate off the topic and the matter at hand that has to be addressed.
No, it's really interesting because as you're saying that too, because we got into a debate the other night with some friends, and my friend was like, "Hey, I was there. I didn't hear it. It didn't happen." And my wife was like, "Well, I was sitting at home and it did. Like, I saw it. Like, you can't avoid it." And I do think that there's a little bit of. I'm reading the book White Fragility right now. There's a little bit of that. Well, no, I mean, it couldn't have been. I mean, we couldn't. I'm not a racist. And it's like, no, we're not saying you were a racist, but did it happen and didn't? But I'd get back to this too, and I'll tell you this, Dane, and I think I mean, it's weird because you and I haven't spent a whole lot of time around each other, but I feel like I do a lot because I feel pretty plugged into your social media, and I know that we comment on each other's from time to time, and I've learned so much during these last 5 months, really since the George Floyd murder, and it's not like, I was like a lot of people, like, well, I've always treated everybody fairly. And so, I'm doing my part. And it's like, no. I've come to learn I can do more. And that these are good discussions to have. Like, this whole thing about stick to sports, first off, they've been saying that since before Ali. They've been saying that since Jesse Owens. So, like, to sit there and say, well, this generation's athletes can't, this has been going on forever. The fact that it's been going on forever might be an indictment of society that we're still having these conversations. But I don't know why we can't just focus on, like you just talked about it. There was a moment on the field of unity. Like, what is there wrong about unity? That's what I don't understand.
Well, I mean, it's a deep topic, and we could spend hours on it for sure. I recognize this. What's necessary to embrace unity, embrace ending racism, embrace us doing more, requires work. And unfortunately, there are people that just don't want to work. They just want to be entertained by athletes and deal with the occasional commercial between plays. They see athletes. There are people that are jealous, that are envious, and they recognize athletes either have a place in their house or in their kids' minds as idols, and they don't want them to also idolize their message. They just want them to idolize their actions or activities on the field or on the court. I get that. I recognize that. I'm a grandfather. I have grandkids. There's some aspect that you have to deal with when you're dealing with grandkids and Danan Hughes, former chief, and the dad. and the mom and my daughter. You know, I mean, there's a dynamic there that you have to be aware of. I'm not saying it's you know an issue in our relationship, but you have to be aware of it. So to me, we're in a society that people don't want to work, and I often challenge people, as you've seen on social media. What do you think our fathers or previous generations said? What did they say when, Joe Johnson or Jack Johnson was boxing? What did they say when Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and those guys got together? What are they saying now? Probably the same thing. So, the Bible says that there's nothing new under the sun. And I challenge people when they say, shut up and dribble, or I don't want politics involved in my sports. I'm like, I kind of have a feeling that your dad or your parents probably said the same thing when Ali was boycotting. And maybe your grandparents probably said the same thing. Don't you find that interesting that we're actually spewing the same message that previous generations for decades have spewed? Don't you think it's time that we recognize that there's a need for change and we look like we are the most biracial, this is the most biracial mixed time in our history. Like it's going to continue to grow. At what point do we take stock in this generation and say, we need a hard reset, just like we do on our cell phones when we go to the store. It's messed up. We need a hard reset. What's wrong with that? The only thing I can see that's wrong with that is people don't want to do the work. They don't want to change their rhetoric. They don't want to have those discussions at home. You and I have been around sports a lot. I talk about kids. They say, well, I just take care of my house, or, we don't talk about race in our house. And I say, okay, well, I want to be a professional baseball player, and I just go home and I just think about it. Like I don't go to the cages. I don't hit off the tee. I don't do soft toss. I don't get any tutoring because I'm just handling myself. That doesn't make sense. We have to work at our craft, and if our craft has to change the narrative in our household, in our circles, make uncomfortable conversations at Thanksgiving and Christmas, we need to do that. And if we don't do it, guess what the next generation is going to be? They're going to be in the same cycle, saying the same stupid, ignorant stuff as this generation, as the previous generations did as well.
If the focus ends up being, by the way, my friend Kiana says a hard reset, and she's always good with the emojis too. Why? Because she's younger than us. That's why. Okay. So, but if the focus becomes on the handful of people that were booing, or if the focus becomes on, I hear this all the time. Well, what about? And then I want to move on, not because I don't want to have this discussion, but there's more I want to ask you. But well, what about the looting? Well, what about? Wait a minute. Let's get back to what was going on here. Why is there protesting? Why is a knee being taken? Why are they locking hands? If we could just ask the question why first, and then have the discussion. And I understand that not everybody wants to have the discussion. By the way, not just because they don't want to work. Some of them just aren't interested in the discussion. Yeah. And unfortunately, they may take another generation or two. But I think that there are a lot of people that if they would just listen and walk in someone else's shoes, when you talk about having kids and grandkids, you are having to have a discussion with those kids that I, as a white man, never had to have with my kids. Well, and that there is it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And what I always tell people, and it was told to me years ago, things don't become real until they become personal. And we can apply that in every aspect of our lives. If you do not feel a plight against you or anyone in your family, you're going to have a harder digestion of someone else's plight because it's not real to you. It's not personal to you. So for me to go out and talk about what I have to tell my kids when they get pulled over, the checklist that they have to go through, not just because of some so-called stat that people want to throw out the stat crap. It's about real life. Like You need to have your hands at 10 and 2. You need to have the lights on in the car. You need to already have your ID stuff. Don't make any sudden movements. All these things that are ingrained in each of my kids' minds when they get pulled over. That's not a conversation. It's not a knock towards you or anybody else that has kids that are not black, but that's just the reality. You just don't have to have that same kind of conversation. You don't have to have this. It's not about, well, they're, the ignorant people that say, well, just don't do anything wrong or don't do anything illegal. Well, that's not the case, because we've seen cases where people haven't done things illegal. And it doesn't matter, because it's a knee-jerk reaction, kind of like people getting swayed to the booze. I grew up near New York City. They had the 3-card Monte. People on the street throwing 3-card Monte. You bet on a card. Go figure. You wind up losing money. It's like the shell game. The talking about the booze is like the shiny object that's over on this side. Everybody gets their eyes towards that, and they forget about what's happening right in front of them. Things got to be real for a lot of people. In order for it to be real, it has to be personal. And unfortunately, what we've seen in America, with a large portion of white America throughout decades, through the civil rights movement, Jim Crow, everything, is the lack of empathy that was necessary for true change, for a true hard reset, because they can't fathom some of the stuff that Black people have gone through. If you went to the University of Cal Berkeley or Wisconsin or Iowa and you spoke to the smartest dean or professor, would you be able to sell that 13% of America is Black, and yet over 50% in the jail are Black? Like, that's not even, like, to most people, that's not even a mathematical probability, unless there's a systemic issue and breakdown. So, I mean, it's deeper, Joel. And like I said, we can go on hours. It's deeper. And what I would want people, the message I would want people is, close your eyes and put yourself in that position. Put yourself dealing with your kid being pulled over. Put yourself in that position of the bystander screaming when a police officer has his knee on someone's neck. That's when it can make personal. Matthew McConaughey was in a movie years ago. I think it was with Samuel L. Jackson, and he was a lawyer, and I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was about a girl being raped and killed in Deep South, a Black girl, and he appealed to the jury and said, close their eyes, and he went through every detail that girl went through in that abuse. And then in the last statement, he said, now imagine if she was white. And then the drama that overtook that scene. That's the message I would want people to recognize, that we have a discrepancy in this country. I think people need to take it personally and make it real to them.
That was the John Grisham book, A Time to Kill. I remember that movie. And the book, for that matter, too, back when I could get through a book without being distracted by 1,000 other things. But I'm trying. I love your comments. I really do. And I actually, when football season's over, sometime in the off season, I'd love to have a deeper discussion on this, because it's become important to me, and it doesn't have to become political. I'm not trying to fight with people. I'm just trying to shed light. And as a white man, I'm trying to shed light on other viewpoints, trying to walk in other people's shoes, trying to, as you just said, close my eyes and picture. Look, my son the other night he texted me late and he said, hey, I got some stuff on my mind. He was trying to not scare me. He's like, I'm just going to go take a walk in the neighborhood. And I thought, okay, just be safe.
Yeah.
And that was it. Like, I didn't. Now, look, you got a big 6'4" kid walking around the neighborhood at 1 a.m. or 12 or whatever it is. I don't worry about anyone, but I didn't worry about him the same way that you might worry about your kid. I thought about that right as he texted me. And so, that's, if we could just continue to walk in other people's shoes. I say that to everybody too, whether you're white, Black, whoever it is, walk in someone else's shoes and then start asking why. All right. I want to move on, because there's so many other things that we could discuss with that, but I'm grateful for your willingness to be open about it. And I knew you would because of your public stance on social media. And the other thing that I kind of wanted to ask though was from an athlete's perspective, there's a lot going on. Like if there was no pandemic and there wasn't everything going on with all the racial injustice, which I understand has always been going on, but it's certainly at the forefront right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's already a ton of pressure on these guys. From Patrick Mahomes to the last guy on the roster to perform on Sundays or Thursdays or whatever day of the week now, it seems like every day in the NFL. That's enough pressure. Like I
Yep.
always say with baseball, you could fail today and go 0 for 4 and come back and address it again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And in football, you got to sit on it for a week. Or in this case, thankfully, they won, 9 or 10 days. It's a
Yep.
lot of pressure. How, as an athlete, do you think that they're balancing all of this? Because you know what? There's safety issues still in terms of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
These guys mostly have families, and it's family first. How much pressure's on these guys right now?
Well, there's inherently a lot of pressure in general. A lot of the players, whether they're in basketball or baseball, especially of a black descent, they are working for a higher cause. They have families that they want to take care of. They may not all of them need to take care of everybody, but they may feel obligated to do so. They have mentors, previous coaches, youth organizations, people that they're connected to back home that they want to help. So that's something that can be viewed as pressure, but it's also something that is kind of the gasoline that adds to the fire in them. But let's not mistake, I said earlier in the broadcast, the MVP to me of this season for the Chiefs, regardless of how it goes, is Rick Burkholder, the trainer for the Chiefs. Because up until this year, think about it from an athletic perspective, and you know this on the baseball side, those trainers have had to work with players from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. When the guys leave, then they do their administrative stuff, and then they go home. They're actually coaching and dealing with the players 24/7 now. What they have to do with the protocol for COVID-19 and how they're getting into the stadium, every base that they have to cover so that they can stay clean and everyone else in the locker room can stay clean. That's a Herculean effort by these trainers. And yet the players are embracing it. So when you talk about the pressure, it's huge normally because you only got 16 games. You don't have 82 and 162 like in the NBA and in MLB. These guys recognize there's very few guaranteed contracts. Your career is an average of 2.3 years in the NFL. All of those details, and then the factor that organizations are designed to try to replace you. As soon as you get there, they're trying to find the next person that can replace you. A lot of pressure for 20-something-year-olds to handle, and then they have to embrace social justice and equality. On top of that, to me, makes them more special than I've ever seen them.
It's an amazing thing, and I look right now, and I don't know Patrick at all. I think I've probably met him twice and shaken a hand. He is one of my owners, by the way. I guess with the Royals, but no, I mean it's. I think a lot about. I think a lot about him as a person and everything that I've heard. Lisa Ginter, Community America, and I know I've got a different sponsor enterprise, but I want to tell the story, and I think everyone will forgive me. But she tells the story about first meeting him, and before he was a star, and his agent was pitching Patrick to them as a representative. She said, "I first want to meet him," and she said by the time that meeting was over, or even as it started, it was like he was talking more about his family, and this is a special person, I believe, from what I can tell. From a distance, well beyond just the talent that we're seeing on the field. How truly once in a generation, and maybe I'm wrong on that, of a person and talent is Patrick Mahomes?
Oh, I mean, he is like the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks to me. And part of the reason is because he's had so much success. He came in behind a guy that would probably be on the mountain right next to him, and Alex Smith. And he's handled himself. You don't want to say perfectly, but in great fashion in every step. Whatever is needed off the field, on the field, how he gives credit to others, how he embraces his responsibilities, the professional that he is in the locker room, the energy, kid-like energy that you see with him on the field, even in practice. I mean, every box that you would want to check to have a franchise quarterback and a franchise leader, we have the luxury of having. And we haven't had that since Len Dawson. I mean, that's the thing. I think, if you go to Green Bay, there's still comparisons to Brett and Aaron. If you go to multiple other places where they had great quarterbacks, Donovan McNabb and Carson Wentz, I mean, you can see where there was, there's that balance that has always happened in those other places. Miami with Marino and other players that they've had since. But here in Kansas City, we hadn't drafted a first-round quarterback since the early 80s. We hadn't had a franchise quarterback that we can put all the weight of the city and the kingdom on the shoulders, and a person who would willingly embrace it and still go out there and perform at the level. And then now to see his strong push for voting and getting people encouraged to go out and vote, not for either side. You don't hear him talking about being a Republican or a Democrat. It's just about being conscious and being aware and being responsible with your right to vote. And just embracing it. He doesn't try to dodge the questions. He doesn't give you the Nuke LaLoosh, Bull Durham, everyday saying.
Yep.
He goes out there, and when you ask him a question, he gives you a heartfelt answer. And it's truly, truly a treasure to have Patrick Mahomes here, and it looks like we're going to have him for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I'm lucky. I mean, in the places that I worked, I covered Brett Favre and then Kurt Warner. Well, Trent first. Trent, I mentioned to Trent last year or 2 years ago. I said, I was the sideline reporter for the game that Rodney Harrison knocked you out and Kurt came in. I remember saying to Vermeil, I said, as he's walking off halftime, and it's like, finally they have a real quarterback in Trent Green, and they have Marshall Faulk, and this is going to be the year. And Trent Green comes back home to where he grew up, and then that happened, and it was like such the plight of a down and out franchise. And I said to Dick, what do you do now? And he goes, we got Kurt Warner. And I'm thinking, okay, sure. Nice guy. That's what everybody was thinking, right? And so, Trent says to me, so it was your fault that you were the one that was on the field that day. But, I did. I went from covering Favre to Warner, and now being here, I'm not working it, and seeing Mahomes. And I mean, there's just something about when you have that once in a lifetime type of quarterback, knowing that no one else has something like that. And so it's a special thing. It's a special time. So as we wrap it up, I'll ask, I guess, the question everybody wants to know amidst all of this chaos, and as football attempts to get through this season, and they'll have some scares. They will. It's going to come. Winning back-to-back Super Bowls, that we don't see that happen anymore. We don't really see it happen in any sport anymore. There's no such thing as a dynasty. I guess a dynasty these days would be the Patriots run, but it wasn't championship back-to-back. So what's it going to take?
I think we should relish the moment, because it's been 50 years between championships, and sometimes we can get ahead of ourselves. But at the same time, if you got a quarterback that signed on for nearly $500 million, and he's going to be here likely for a long period of time, I don't know if the full 10 years, but he'll be here. It's expected, it's hoped for, but as you said, it's tough. And to be able to, if they can string together 3 championships in the next 5 years, and having gone 50 years since the previous one, I think we should be ecstatic about it. And but at the same time, anything can happen. Like you said with Trent in St. Louis, you go down with injury, that can change the tide of your organization and your city, positively or negatively. So I would just tell fans to embrace the moment, enjoy what you have, talk as much trash like I do as you can, and just live for recognizing that we have a front seat to greatness here in Kansas City at that quarterback position for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
And let's hope for the best.
I couldn't agree with you more. Before we get out of here, I got to share this tweet that came in this morning from our mutual friend, Brad Porter. And he knows I'm a Wisconsin guy, so he wanted to get that picture up there. Look at that young wide receiver.
Oh my gosh!
University
that
of
was
Iowa.
Probably size 14 neck, maybe 13 neck. I don't know. It was a slim dude in that picture.
I was gonna ask you though. I know for me, the greatest. I'll tell you in a second who the greatest football player I covered was. Who was the most talented player that you ever stepped foot on the field with?
Oh man, that's tough. I was drafted with Will Shields. We both came here together. The same season, the Chiefs signed Marcus Allen and Joe Montana. Played with Derek Thomas. Ronnie Lott came here towards the end of his career. Dale Carter was the best defensive back that I ever played against. It's tough to nail down one. I saw some special plays from Joe. I loved how Marcus was a professional, how he practiced and approached every game. I just, outside of this window of time, and maybe some people would say during Priest, Holmes, and Trent Green time during the early 2000s was a special time. The 90s, a lot of people would believe was second to what we're experiencing now around Kansas City, and it's because of all that star power. And catching balls from Joe was amazing, and being on the field with Marcus and being drafted with Will, who winds up being one of the best offensive linemen to ever play. It's hard to nail down one. DT on the defensive side, gosh, I mean, I don't know. I can't even put myself in that position to select one. But there was a lot of special athletes.
Well, the answer in itself was great because it gave the wide range of superstars that you got to play with. I mean, who gets to tell their grandkids about Joe Montana the way that you can? For me, the best football player I ever covered was Marshall Faulk, hands down. And that's, having covered Favre. And it's there's a lot of apples and oranges here. I mean, I covered Reggie White in Green Bay. Are you kidding me? To walk into a locker room as a young reporter and see that figure, perhaps in the shadows of a Gilbert Brown, but you know what I mean. I mean that defensive line at Gilbert Brown and Sean Jones and Reggie White, and you're talking about Brett Favre in there, and then you go to Kansas City and see Warner and Falk and Bruce and Holt and Aeneas Williams on the defensive side, and Orlando Pace to me was our Will Shields. I mean, you're talking about two of the greatest offensive linemen and two of the nicest men you can meet in history. But there was something different about Marshall Faulk because there was no one else like him in that generation with the way he could do the thing. It gives me chills just to think about the amount of absolute talent. I mean, that's one of the great choices. Okay, and then the last question follow-up was Danan Hughes, Ryan Lefevre, Iowa, Minnesota. What were those matchups like?
Ryan, so Ryan was the first team All Big Ten center fielder. I was second team. So that tells you. The other thing, Ryan always likes to play down his baseball skills. I played against Ryan for 3 years, and I never saw him strike out. He was one of the most dangerous hitters that was in college baseball to me, and just a fun dude. He tells the stories about watching me play football and doing the snow angel against Minnesota and ribbing his Golden Gopher friends and teammates. But yeah, Ryan was special on the baseball field. So I'm gonna give the nod over to Ryan that he was a better center fielder than me.
All right, fine. We'll give him the nod in baseball. You get the nod in football. You were the two-sport athlete, though, which not a lot of people get the chance to do that one. And so it's I know so much of your background and what makes you the broadcaster that you are today, being able to work in both worlds. Danan, I love the conversation. I love everything that you're doing on social media and obviously up in the booth. It's great to be able to turn on the radio and hear you and Mitch and I told you the other day I was able to do that on the way home from Royals, and I'm looking forward to doing more of it. But I'd love to continue the conversation sometime down the road. I think that there are more conversations that need to be had. But most importantly, have a great football season, continue the good work, and I could even support, I guess, an Iowa Hawkeye.
I appreciate you having me, Joel. I will make one more note. You talked about the book, White Fragility.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage everybody listening and watching to read that book. It's very enlightening. My wife bought about 6 copies and sent them out to friends. And it's enlightening. It's not an indictment on who you are as a person or anything like that. It's just an enlightening book. And, you know, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another is what's in the Bible. And I think that's a great way to do that. So you may want to partake of it. I appreciate you for digging into that. And thanks for having me, man.
Well, it's great to catch up. It's been too long, and yes, I would. And I'm working my way through that book. I mentioned before, as a guy that struggles to finish books because I get pulled off into too many tangents. It's my own lack of focus. That's a shorter book. It's doable. Trust me, folks. It's doable. And have an open mind. It is not meant to be an indictment. It doesn't need to be an indictment on you. It is meant to be a guide. Hopefully, something that maybe allows you to put some glasses on and see some things a little bit more clearly. I think that's probably a fair way of saying it.
Perfect.
Danan, thanks. Have a great week. I know a lot of preparation. Oh, I forgot. 610 Sports Thursday nights.
Yeah, Thursday night we have my show, which will be going on the 3rd season, Players Only, with Joe Mays, a former linebacker with the Chiefs, and Sean Barber, former linebacker. He pops in every once in a while, and it is just players in the booth talking about the game, sports, what's happening on and off the field from a player's perspective. And it's been received very well. At 610, those guys at Intercom have embraced us for another season, and I'm looking forward. We get started this Thursday night, 6 to 7 p.m. on 610 or on your radio.com app.
All right, check it out. Danan Hughes, Thursday night, and then, of course, on 106.5 The Wolf. I believe I've got the change on that one. And everybody's finding that now. They'll find their Chiefs. They know how to find their Chiefs. So you can listen to Danan and Mitch Holt this mostly Sunday, sometimes Monday, sometimes Thursday, when the Chiefs are playing. Danan, thanks. Have a great week. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. Danan Hughes, former Chiefs radio announcer, among many others. I love that conversation. I hope you'll share it all with your friends. So thank you for that. And to KCAV, Kansas City Audio Visual, for the studio. If you have audio visual needs, check them out. And to my friends at Enterprise Bank and Trust, #NoStoppingYou. That's going to do it for this episode of Rounding the Bases. I'm Joel Goldberg. Have a great Tuesday, everyone.